because when they were going, I spoke at length to the people of Nevis, introducing the persons who would be representing Nevis at the Youth Parliament in Cayman Islands. Nevis team comprised of 4 persons plus the chaperone, and the 4 youth parliamentarians were Roger Williams, Charlene Myers, Celestial Hanley, who is here right now, and Lauren Lawrence. The teacher or the chaperone was Miss Yuta Taylor, and she is sitting in the second row to the back. All in all, the Nevis that these young parliamentarians, youth parliamentarians, would have made in Cayman Islands. I invited them to be here this morning, and unfortunately, Lauren is unable to attend, and I suspect that the others will show up during the course of the day. But I just wanted to say how pleased the Nevis delegation attending the 43rd conference, regional conference of the CPA was. The team comprised of myself, the clerk of the assembly, and the Honorable Leader of Government Business, Honorable Alexis Jeffers, and the junior minister. In respect to the female junior minister, she was there but had to leave early, so she was not part of the youth parliament sitting. And so I just want, for the record, to show that we have really give credence to the performance of the youth parliamentarians who represented Nevis in Cayman Islands. Thank you.
And good morning to this honorable house, my colleagues who are sitting in the chambers, and those persons who are in the gallery. Mr. President, from the last sitting of this house, I would have done some travels on government's business, and I would just like to give an account to this honorable house and to the general public as to my stewardship over the past 2 or 3 months, and to indicate what my involvement has been during this period. And so, Mr. President, I want to highlight a number of forums that I would have attended. On May 22nd to 24th, I attended the Gender Responsive Climate Action Forum, which was held in Port of Spain, Trinidad. This was organized by PAL Americas, and we saw some 22 countries being recognized and attended this forum. This was held in collaboration with the House of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And out of this forum, Mr. President, we looked at gender responsive climate action. And I wanted to bring this to the Honorable House, Mr. President, because we are very much into the hurricane season. And we, as a government, would like to make decisive steps as to how we get persons ready and prepared to deal with issues affecting our citizenry as it pertains to climate change and as it pertains to disasters, and how we deal with disasters once they would have happened, and how we assess ourselves in making ourselves ready to deal with certain disasters. And so, Mr. President, out of this, I just want to read one paragraph to show the rationalizing of this forum. And it says here that climate change poses severe global threat to our future, and that responding to climate change requires immediate, concerted, long-term planning and action in order to preserve development and the gains to achieve the goals of the 2030 agenda. The highlight of this forum, Mr. President, was to introduce gender-based budgeting. Now, in Nevis, we have program-based budgeting. What this forum sought to do was to encourage us as parliamentarians to take budgeting to a next level, and that is to add a new component. And so when we think of projects and programs, we add a new dimension, and that is looking through the gender lens and make budgeting to that degree where we look at how it would impact both genders. And another thing that, interestingly, that came out of this forum, Mr. President, is that there is another grouping. I wouldn't say it is gender, I wouldn't call it gender, but there is that grouping that it is taboo for us to discuss. But the LGBT community is one such grouping that is making great waves. And so one of the things that came out of this forum is how we are to integrate that grouping into our planning so that we can prevent stereotyping and prevent them from being labeled or refused access to certain programs and projects that we have for the two standard genders, male and female. And so all in all, out of this forum, Mr. President, there was an adoption, and out of that adoption, the parliamentarians who were present signed off to using our public platforms to raise awareness about gender differentials in climate change and the urgent need to reduce that risk factor. So that was one forum, Mr. President. And I might say that this is a wider discussion I need to have with the Minister of Finance and the technicians at the Ministry of Finance, because if we are to mitigate risk and help persons to rebound after disasters, we have to then move to the level of being specific with preparing our budgets, and to move to the level where we have gender as the mainstay of our budgeting process. Mr. President, I also want to speak on another forum I would have attended in Trinidad and Tobago as well over a 2-day period, and this was the Interparliamentarian Group on Population and Development, the IAPG, and this was sponsored by that grouping as well as the UNFPA, which is the United Nations Population Fund. And they, throughout this 2-day session, we also look at what are the main focus in the Caribbean. This is also a grouping of Latin America and the Caribbean. However, this grouping was only with the Caribbean fraction. And so we came up with a number of areas that the Caribbean are looking at priority areas. And one such area is reproductive and health, and health, as well as health and reproductive rights for Caribbean citizens. That is one area which the Caribbean wants to push forward and get funding and bring more awareness. This too had a number of goals that we would have signed off on. And I must say, at this sitting, at this forum, Mr. President, there was an establishment of a new grouping for the Caribbean as we seek to move forward with different health issues. And so MP from St. Lucia, Mr. Jean-Baptiste, is the new chair of that forum, with the Minister of Health from Guyana being the chairperson or the rep to the larger grouping of the UNFPA, and myself as the coordinator for the Caribbean region. So that, Mr. President, would have been what we would have discussed at that forum. And another of the most important issues that we want to take forward as a Caribbean as a bloc is to take the necessary measures to achieve the SDGs, especially those pertaining to the health goal, which is goal number 3, through improvements to mental health, maternal health, reducing infant mortality rates, and to continue to fight against HIV and AIDS. And the third such forum that I attended, Mr. President, would have been the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Forum held in the Cayman Islands. As you alluded to, I was only able to attend the first part, which is the CWP, the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, and was absent for the second part, which is the Commonwealth Parliamentarians Association. And at that forum, I was asked to speak on strengthening women's political participation in the Commonwealth Caribbean. And that came as a result of a particular publication that I had some working and made some contribution to. This was done by the Commonwealth Secretariat, and it is Women and Political Parties in 5 small states of the Commonwealth Caribbean. And we looked at Belize, Dominica, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Kitts and Nevis. And based on that, I was asked to present on strengthening women's political participation. This, Mr. President, also took me to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London, the Women's Forum, earlier this year, and was asked to present on the same topic. And so, Mr. President, this, I think, in a nutshell, would give you an idea as to my travels in the last 3 months. Thank you.
Mr. President, good morning. Let me say good morning to all present here. And it gives me pleasure to just briefly report on some of the things that have been taking place in my ministry. Of course, we know that I have a very, very busy ministry with several departments that have been very active over the past months, and I just want to report very quickly on some of the things. First of all, in terms of youth, we've seen the completion of a 1-week summer job attachment workshop, which was held a couple of weeks ago, of course organized by the Youth and Sports Department. Of course, over the years, the Youth Department has been ensuring that our school leavers are exposed to numerous subject areas in terms of the world of work. And after that 1-week workshop, the participants get an opportunity to be attached to workplaces, both in the private and the public sector. The program has gone exceptionally well over the years, and normally we have in excess of 50 students from both the 5th form level and the 6th form level who take part in this program. And the good thing about it as well, Mr. President, that sometimes when you have students being attached to various institutions based on their performance, these institutions will actually recall them after they would have had their results from the exams. In terms of sports, Mr. President, I am pleased to report that my ministry would have sponsored the Nevis under-19 cricket team to take part in the Leeward Islands Under-19 competition, which just ended in Montserrat only yesterday. And I'm happy to say as well that I was pleased this morning to be able to meet our Under-19 ambassadors, as I call them, who just returned from Montserrat. And even though we were a little disappointed, Mr. President, we did not get the gold. I personally expected the gold. The cricketers expected the gold. We placed third, but I must say that our Under-19 cricketers performed creditably in Montserrat. So creditably that even though Antigua were the eventual winners of the tournament, Nevis won Antigua. And that speaks volume. So we won the champion, who are the champions. And there were some noteworthy performances, which I must mention. We had Jelani Manos, who scored 90 in one of the games. Carlon Tuckett, 44 not out. Justin Amurdan, 75 and 92. Marcus Drewbury, who was the captain, 33, 29 and 42. Chevron Jeffers, 55. And in the bowling department, we had T1 Prentice getting a 3 for 39. And of course, Kian Pemberton, who actually made it to the West Indies youth team, he did creditably as well, 4 for 39 and 4 for 45. Kian was the man of the match in the competition against Anguilla, and I was notified this morning as well that Kian was the most successful bowler of the entire tournament. So we would have won 2 of the games. We won Antigua and Anguilla, and unfortunately we would have lost to Montserrat and St. Kitts. But kudos to the team for doing a marvelous job, and I must say thanks as well to the officials. And as a matter of fact, I must also say here that we had the manager, we had the coach, and we had a scorer who traveled from Nevis to Montserrat. And our scorer, Charlene Martin, was the most outstanding scorer of the tournament as well. And she now will actually be going to Montserrat and Anguilla to do some training in terms of scoring. In the line of sports as well, Mr. President, Sanelda Willett, she would have made it to the Leeward Islands female cricket team as the vice captain as well. So Nevis continues to make strides. And of course, Carlon Tuckett, we know, would have made it to the West Indies under-15 team. In basketball, we've just seen the completion of the Nevis Amateur Basketball Association tournament. That was won by Old School. And let me just take this opportunity to congratulate that team. They would have defeated the defending champions, CG Rebels, on Thursday night. In the area of social services, Mr. President, my social services department continues to touch the lives of many of our divisions and residents. And of course, we are trying our utmost to enhance the lives and try to reach out to our vulnerable and less fortunate in our community. And I'm very pleased to report to this honorable house that only very recently we would have handed out the keys to 2 houses built by my department, social services, and those houses the keys were presented to Mr. Joseph Belgrave in Spring Hill and Ms. Cassandra Phillip over in Fountain. And the recipients were extremely pleased. And I have to note here that I know that when we do these kind of things, we are under a lot of pressure because everybody wants to know, well, where is my house? But I have to ask the people of Nevis to be patient with my ministry. We know the situation and we will rise to the challenge. And I would just like to as well say thank you to the member for Nevis for assisting in terms of providing the land and so on, so that at least we can provide these houses to the recipients. In social services as well, Mr. President, we continue to celebrate our seniors. And on the 20th of June, we would have seen one of our seniors from my constituency, Miss Eileen Smithon of Zion. She celebrated her 101st birthday. And I want to congratulate Miss Smithon once again, wish her happy belated birthday. And numerous other persons continue to make milestone birthdays. I think the people of Nevis, Mr. President, are living long lives. And I believe one of the reasons why they are living such long lives is because of the great care that the Seniors Division of the Department of Social Services continue to give to our seniors. Only this past Friday, we had a beachnik organized by the Seniors Division. And Mr. President, you would not want to see the seniors there in their swimwear. And I was actually wondering whether or not we should organize a swimwear competition for the seniors, because they were looking absolutely wonderful. And all kudos to the Seniors Division of the Department of Social Services. Very quickly, Mr. President, I would like to touch quickly on Culturama. Of course, I'm in charge of the Ministry of Culture as well. And I can say that things are progressing extremely well for what promises to be a grand event for the Caribbean's greatest summer line, Culturama 2018. Of course, we know that last year we would have had a great facelift for the cultural village. We would have spent over $1 million, over $1.5 million. This year, we are also having a facelift done to the cultural complex, Mr. President. And I have to say that the work there is progressing extremely well. We did some work on the food booths. That is completed. We would have been doing some work on the stands, the seating area. I was there only yesterday. That is almost complete, Mr. President. And we are also doing some work on the stage area. And just to allay the fears of, or the concerns of persons, that all of the work will be completed way in advance of the start of our cultural festival on the 26th of July. And I must say kudos to the contractors who would have done a great job. They would have done it with speed. And our patrons to the activities for Culturama will be in comfort. Mr. President, I must also say that only recently we would have had the successful reveal for the participants in the various shows for 2018. And we are also happy to say that the Mr. Cool competition is back this year. We would have also had, Mr. President, for the very first time, an elimination for the Soca Monarch competition. The interest was so great. We're breaking a lot of records this year, Mr. President. The interest for Soca Monarch was so great that we had to have an eliminations. And now we have 12 semi-finalists for the groovy segment and 12 semi-finalists for the power segment. In the line of Calypso, Mr. President, I would also like to report that this year we have at least 22 persons, 22 Calypsonians who have really already indicated an interest in taking part in the competition, more than last year, Mr. President. And I also have to say that this coming Saturday, the 7th of July, we'll have our first tent. And we know that tents have been absent from Culturama for a number of years. Tents came back last year and they're back again this year. So we are having our first tent this coming Saturday at Mem's Pizzeria. And so I'm inviting all of Nevis, all those who love Calypso, to come out and show your support. The Calypsonians have been rehearsing diligently, and I know that the standard of Calypso will be extremely high this year. So the first tent is this coming Saturday at Mem's at 9 o'clock, and then the eliminations will be on Sunday, the 15th of July. In terms of the junior Calypsonians, Mr. President, we have a record number 14 junior Calypsonians for 2018, Mr. President. And that speaks volumes for the interest that has been generated in this festival, the interest that is being generated in our young people. And for the very first time as well, we would have had a performance workshop this past Saturday at the Cultural Village for the junior Calypsonians. For the talented youth, the contestants, we have 6 schools that have confirmed their participation this year. They would have appeared on the Youth on the Go program on Vaughan Radio this past Saturday. And all in all, things seem to be going well where that is concerned as well. And I must also say, Mr. President, that only yesterday at NEPAC, we had what we call the reveal of some of the costumes for the junior street parade. Of course, we know that this is the first time that we'll be having a junior street parade separate and apart from the regular parade that we have on parade day. And so we are having a junior street parade this year for the very first time. And we have solicited the support of practically all of the schools. And from what I've heard, all of the primary schools and the secondary schools will be, that is the public ones, will be part of the junior street parade this year. And I have to say that I was very impressed with the costume that I saw yesterday. I have to say kudos and congratulations to the NCDF, the Nevis Cultural Development Foundation. We have given them the mandate to run with the parade, the junior parade this year, and they've done a marvelous job. They're the ones who have actually made the costumes, and I must say that they're looking very impressive, and I'll be asking persons to come out and support the junior street parade. And of course, I would also ask that, or encourage our citizens and residents of Nevis, as well as our sister island St. Kitts, to start signing up for the troops. We have at least 8 troops that have already registered, and we also have in Juve troops this year as well, Mr. President. We have 4 Juve troops that have signed up, that have registered. And so I'll be encouraging all who might be interested. You may never have played Mass before. This is your year to start, Mr. President. So I'm asking persons to be a part of the festival this year. The promise is to be grand, and we look forward to the official opening at the Cultural Village on the 26th of July. Mr. President, as I said, I would like to thank all those who have been involved in the work, the extensive work, the great work of all of my departments, and may it please you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President, good morning. I rise to make a very brief statement, Mr. President, as it regards to a number of the ministries that have been charged with, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to start with the Public Works Department. And I want to say, Mr. President, that the Gingerland Secondary School administration wing are being completed, and that building, Mr. President, are being handed over to the principal and the staff of the Gingerland Secondary School. I want to, Mr. President, thank the principal and the staff at the Gingerland Secondary School for their patience. I believe that this was a project, Mr. President, that took a bit longer than anticipated. But I believe, Mr. President, that the principal and staff and students will be a lot more comfortable in performing their duties at that institution. I want to thank, Mr. President, the good folks there at Public Works who oversaw this project. I want to thank the contractor, the electrician, the plumber, the air conditioner, subcontractors for ensuring that this project got to the stage of completion. Mr. President, the Public Works Department continued to undertake a number of road projects throughout the island. And at present, we are undertaking a section in the Jessops area, Mr. President, which we hope would be completed very shortly. We have undertaken a number of areas in the Stony Grove area, in both Lower Stony Grove, Mr. President, and Upper Stony Grove. And the Upper Stony Grove section, we believe, would complete probably this week, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Brownhill project continues. And I want to say how happy I am, Mr. President, of the progress of this project. We have completed a number of walls that we had to have taken down, which was stone wall, Mr. President, and we have had a number of contractors which would have constructed a number of walls to replace those that were taken down. We continue, Mr. President, with a bypass road as well, from Brown Hill into the Prospect area, which would be a side road from the Brown Hill area into Prospect that would take you down to the Mondochak area. So work on that is ongoing, and we expect, Mr. President, that to be completed shortly as well. Mr. President, I want to speak about a little pet project. Maybe a simple project, Mr. President, but it's a very significant project. It's a little sidewalk there in the heart of Charlestown, Mr. President, next to the Charlestown Police Station. And I have always looked at that area, Mr. President, where an accident was waiting to happen. I have noticed that persons would have stepped off of the sidewalk and almost direct into traffic. And it was an accident waiting to happen. I am happy, Mr. President, that we were able to have some conversations with the property owners, or some tough conversation, Mr. President, and we were able to create a sidewalk there. And I am happy about it, Mr. President, because it creates some safety in the heart of Charlestown. I want to thank the two property owners for relinquishing portions of their property to the people of Nevis in the interest of safety and the well-being of our pedestrians. That, Mr. President, as I said, is a very simple project, but it is very important when it comes to the safety of our people traversing to Charlestown. Mr. President, it's no secret that the traffic in Charlestown is becoming unattainable, so to speak. And that is an area where I felt that an accident was waiting to happen. I want to thank the contractor, and I want to thank the assistant PS at the ministry who oversaw that project to bring it to completion, Mr. President. Mr. President, with regards to water, the water department continued to go above and beyond the call of duty under some very tough circumstances at times. Mr. President, they have started the transmission pipeline from Rollins to Pond Hill. And I just want to say to our road users that there may be some interruption with the water and with also the traffic. And I want to request of our traffic users, our road users, to be very careful, Mr. President, in the Rollins and Pond Hill area while this work is ongoing. We are talking, Mr. President, of some 4,000 feet of high-density polyurethane pipes. Mr. President, we have also commenced the Westbury to Jessop's transmission lines as well, from Westbury to the Jessop tank. And while there may not be as much interruption with regards to the traffic, there may be some interruption with regards to the supply of water. Mr. President, the Morgan Estate to the Upper Hamilton project is completed. And I believe now that another section of Hamilton and Morgan Estate can now be assured of a much more reliable supply of water. And all of these projects, Mr. President, are a part of the CDB Water Supply Enhancement Project. A project, Mr. President, which I hope that we can bring to an end by the end of this year. In Brown Hill, Mr. President, while we are undertaking the road construction, we are also ensuring that we replace some very old metal pipe in that area. And that work too is ongoing and is progressing very nicely, Mr. President. As I said, the Water Department continue to work and go beyond the call of duty. And I want to thank them for the hard work that they continue to do in ensuring that the people of Nevis, Mr. President, have a continued improved supply of water distribution. Mr. President, I also want to inform this House and the people of Nevis that we have completed the repairs of the roof at the storage tank at the camp source. This roof, Mr. President, was a roof that got damaged during the last hurricane. And not only that, it was a very old, deteriorated roof. And the contractor said to me that he is very familiar, or he was very familiar with that area because he used to work there with his dad. And he too, Mr. President, was very alarmed at the condition of it. But I'm pleased and I'm happy that that roof is completely repaired, completely restored, and we hope to put that storage tank back in use very shortly. Mr. President, with regards to the government repair shop, this is an area, our department, Mr. President, that have come under some harsh criticism over the years. And I believe, Mr. President, that we are moving in a time where for the government vehicles to get the best useful life out of them, the government repair shop must be up to a particular standard. And we are searching, Mr. President, for what I call a tech-savvy mechanic, someone who is adverse when it comes to computer, as it relates to vehicle. We are fully aware, Mr. President, that all of these vehicles nowadays are computer-driven. And we believe that for the government repair shop to function at its optimum, we must have certain requisite skills at that repair shop for them to perform at their optimum. We believe, Mr. President, that some of the repairs that have taken place at that repair shop have not been as to what has been expected. And I've noticed, Mr. President, certain deficiencies. And so we have taken the initiative, Mr. President, to order a vehicle lift for the mechanic shop, the government repair mechanic shop. We believe that if they have the necessary tools to function and function properly, then we expect them to produce and to perform at their optimum. Mr. President, with regards to our Labor Department, I want to announce that on Thursday, July 5th, the Labor Department would be conducting a job fair, Mr. President. A job fair with the aim of preparing our young people for the world of work. And I want to encourage, Mr. President, as many of our school leavers as possible to attend. I want to encourage our various businesses, Mr. President, to come to this job fair and do what I call some scouting, Mr. President. Because I believe that within this setup of this job fair, I want the various businesses to be exposed to the talent that we have in our young people. And so on Thursday, at the Social Security Conference Room there at Pinnes, the Labor Department would be convening an all-day job fair under the theme, Preparing Our Youth for a World of Work. And Mr. President, I believe that it is the start of great things for our young people. Mr. President, as it relates to our Public Works Department, over the years, Mr. President, we have lost a number of our technical staff. We have lost, I think was 3 civil engineers. We have lost architect. We have lost a quantity surveyor. And we believe, Mr. President, that this would have put tremendous strain on the performance of our Public Works Department. And so, Mr. President, we are looking for a quantity surveyor. I am of the view, Mr. President, that for us to spend the people's money, we must be able to spend it properly. We must cut down the wastage. and we must ensure that the people get value for their money. We have been able, Mr. President, in just a few days ago, being able to attract an architect to the public works. We have been able to attract a civil engineer to the public works. And we believe, Mr. President, that this is the beginning of strengthening the technical staff there at the Public Works Department. We believe, Mr. President, that these additions to the staff would not only enhance the performance of our Public Works Department, but it will bring greater value to the people of Nevis. And so, Mr. President, I want to say to the young, talented quantity surveyor, somewhere out there that is looking for a job and some opportunity, to come and talk to us. And I must say, Mr. President, this is a desperate need for the Public Works Department. We will be embarking on a number of projects, Mr. President, and we want to make sure, Mr. President, that every single dollar that is spent would be accounted for in the interest of the people of Nevis. And so, Mr. President, I encourage that person who is looking for a job to come and talk to us. Mr. President, I want to end my brief statement by saying how pleased I am, Mr. President, with the steps that we are making with regards to a number of amendments that we are now embarking on with regards to the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Ordinance and everything that has to do with planning. We have been engaged, Mr. President, over the last few months to make sure that we had a comprehensive look of all of the legislation that has to do with planning. And in very short order, Mr. President, we hope to come to this House to bring those amendments that will be in the interest of the people of Nevis and the development of Nevis. Thank you, Mr. President, and may it please.
Let me make an interjection here. Could you kindly put your cell phones on vibration or turn them off? Please, we have had some interruptions here this morning, and I can't take it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to make a brief statement. And when I said brief, I'm going to be brief. But it was not my intention to speak at this point in the proceedings. But after hearing your commendations that were laid on the students who would have traveled to the Cayman Islands, I believe it would have been remiss of me if I didn't come and add my share of congratulations as well. I see we have three of those students here, Raul J., Miss Smith, and also Charlene Myers. And Miss Lawrence is missing, yes, but I'm sure she's hearing. I also want to congratulate Miss Taylor, who was the chaperone for those students. Why I'm making this statement, Mr. President, is because I was indeed fascinated, and my heart was warmed by the performance of those four students there in the Cayman Islands. And when I looked at their performance, I sat there and looked at their performance. Their performance is measured up to all of the other students and even surpassed, because you did congratulate Raul J. Williams for his exploits in terms of being adjudged the best speaker on the government side of that argument. I want to say, though, that it doesn't stop there. It goes beyond just being a part of the Youth Parliamentary Association, but also it certainly set the stage for the future exploits of our young people. I myself was once a member of the Anglican Young People's Association, the AYPA, and I believe back in those days when I joined in 1987, the arguments and the discussions we would have had at that point in time, I believe we were light years ahead of our time when we were discussing topics based on economics, based on world affairs and so forth. And these are the type of interactions that certainly make us better persons as we go along in life. And of course, the young persons who we're speaking of may not become politicians in their time or during their lifetime. But of course, in other areas, in other sectors, in other disciplines, the experience that they would have gained at this early age would certainly set the stage for them moving forward. Raul J, I believe, has said that he wants to be a neurosurgeon, so he's not interested in politics per se. But I believe what he has done over the last 4 years, that would have certainly given him the confidence and the knowledge and the know-how and the impetus to go into an area that is, I believe, will pay him well when the time comes. So I wish him well in that area, and all of the other students who are thinking of going into other areas that are specialized areas that we certainly would need here in Nevis as well too. So even though Roger go abroad, I hope he comes back and we'll have need for him here on the island of Nevis. Mr. President, I also want to congratulate you because I believe there was a point in time between 2003 and 2013 the youth parliament would have grown dormant here on the island of Nevis. And it's because of your exploit and your initiative and your hard work, we would have seen the resurgence of this particular body here on the island of Nevis. And we join in congratulating you because young people are difficult to work with. We know that. We hear that all the time. We see it. And there are so many competitions out there now, so to get young people involved, it is certainly a task, and we want to congratulate you for sticking with it and hope that we can provide the support for you as we go forward and bring more young people along, and to make sure that the island of Nevis is indeed the beneficiary of your hard work, our hard work, and the hard work of our young people. So I want to thank you for that. I myself had a chance to make some contributions at that particular conference, the 43rd Annual Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Conference. At least I was given the opportunity, and I was grateful for that, to chair one of the plenary sessions on education and the contribution of education to the overall development of our economies here in the Caribbean. And of course, I believe that was one of the best sessions that we would have had there. I say that because, primarily because I was the one who was the chair. but indeed, the discussions were fruitful. I said there, though, that there's no need to come to these conferences and conduct a talk shop, so to speak, and not put our words into action. And that is what we find throughout the Caribbean from time to time, that a lot of talk goes on, and then at the end of it all, you go back to your respective territories and then nothing happens. So we have to find a way to turn words into action and make this Caribbean a much better place for all of us as we forge ahead with a competitive world before us. We have to find ways to make sure that we're putting our words into action. Mr. President, I will speak of an important initiative that was proposed and passed by the Cabinet of the Nevis Island Administration. And I'll read that for you quickly. It will form part of my presentation here right now, and also the media houses, I'm sure, will have a chance to pick this up and have it played at some point later. But it reads as such, Mr. President: the Office of Disaster Management here on Nevis continues to impress on our citizens and residents of the need to make adequate preparation as we approach the hurricane season. Last year, many Caribbean islands suffered severe damages as a result of the passage of Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria. In the aftermath of these hurricanes, the federal government took the decision to exempt custom import duties and custom service charges on all building materials purchased to effect repairs after the hurricane. Many of the citizens who were affected did not benefit fully from this exercise, mainly because the disaster assessment was not done in a timely manner. Thus, persons were forced to use their ready cash to purchase materials from business places such as TDC, Hosfords, and other entities here on the island to stop leakages in their house roofs. Upon presenting duty-free concession letters to these business places, they were unable to get reimbursement for their building materials. While it is expected that as a government we will have to provide some measure of relief after the passage of a storm, the Ministry of Agriculture and disaster management, feels that it is important to incentivize our citizens and residents and provide some relief as part of their preparation efforts leading into the upcoming hurricane season. To this end, Mr. President, the Ministry of Agriculture and Disaster Management made a proposal, like I said, to the Cabinet of the Nevis Island Administration for the consideration of granting of waiver of custom duties to all citizens and residents as they prepare for the hurricane season on hurricane shutters. Now, these shutters can be bought locally, they can be bought overseas, they can purchase the materials that will be used to construct those shutters. But of course, they will be receiving, or they will receive, custom duty waiver on the materials. The VAT is applicable, and also duties would be waived. So we are encouraging our people, all of our citizens and residents, to start your preparation, since we are giving you this relief at this point. It runs from the 1st of June until the 31st of October. So we're hoping persons will take advantage to install shutters, whether they're going to be made locally, whether they're going to import them. This is an incentive we are hoping that they will take advantage of, so as to get their properties or their houses in a state of readiness for the upcoming season. We may not, none of us know what would transpire this year, but as the Scout motto says, be prepared. And we are encouraging our people to use this incentive to get themselves in a state of readiness for what is to come. Mr. President, a statement would be made shortly after this meeting regarding this particular incentive and this particular relief, so that it can be rebroadcast again and again. So, Mr. President, thank you for the few minutes that was granted. I would want to stop there for now, and may it please you, Mr. President.
Personal explanations. Public business, bill second and third reading.
Good morning, Mr. President. I rise with your leave to move that the bill shortly entitled Tax Administration Procedures Amendment Bill 2018 be read a second time, and that we, the members of this Honorable House, be allowed to debate the contents of that bill.
Mr. President, I rise to second motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled Tax Administration and Procedure Ordinance Bill 2018 read a second time.
Mr. President, I rise to open the debate on this bill, which hitherto had its first reading. It's a simple bill, running just a page and a half or thereabouts, and it seeks, Mr. President, to amend the Tax Administration and Procedures Ordinance, Chapter 6.11 of our revised laws. The object is to amend Section 37 of the parent legislation, and we propose to amend Section 37 by replacing the title of the section with the following new title: Penalty for Late Filing or Late Payment, and inserting immediately after subsection 4 a new subsection 5 as follows. So what will become 37.5, Mr. President? And I read, notwithstanding anything in any other law in force in St. Christopher and Nevis, where any taxpayer A fails to furnish tax returns in accordance with Section 10 of the ordinance, Or B, fails to pay taxes as they become due and payable for 3 consecutive tax periods. Or C, is convicted of an offence under Section 60 of the ordinance, the comptroller may publish in a newspaper circulating in St. Christopher and Nevis the name of the taxpayer and the reason for publishing. And at paragraph C, inserting a new subsection 6 as follows, and so there will be a new 37.6, Mr. President, which reads, a person who fails to pay tax, being the whole or part of the remainder of any tax due or payable under this Act, by the due date shall be liable to a penalty equal to 10% of the amount of the tax due. Mr. President, the bill really is intended to introduce some measures similar to those already in force pursuant to the federal statute and already in force in St. Kitts, the Tax Administration Procedures Amendment Act, provide generally for the publication of names of those who fail to furnish tax returns and fail to pay their taxes due and assessed for 3 consecutive tax periods. And further, Mr. President, to impose a penalty of 10% of the tax due in respect of any taxes unpaid under the ordinance. These measures, we are advised by our Inland Revenue Department, have been very effective on our sister island of St. Kitts, but we in Nevis have been hampered in our collections because of the public perception that there is no penalty or significant penalty for the failure to pay taxes. Mr. President, I want to make an appeal, clarion call, if you will, to the members of our public here. I believe the language that the Inland Revenue authorities have employed is that we ought to be responsible citizens. The truth is that not a day goes by that I, as the Premier of Nevis, am not inundated with requests from our residents for more. Our people want more roads and better roads. You would have heard from our Minister of Infrastructure and Public Works all the roads, water upgrades, and various events that are happening on the island. You would have heard that there are people out there who are indigent and need housing, and our Minister of Social Development has explained what we're doing in that regard. You would have heard of Culturama and all of our efforts in relation to the preservation of our culture. You would have heard about health care, Mr. President. And our people continue to make demands. Street lights, better roads, better health care, better buildings, better services. Mr. President, I say all that to say that none of this comes for free. And since the government is not in the business of printing money, we have to get revenue in order to satisfy the ever-growing demands of our public and the ever-growing demands of a modern society that we're seeking to build here on the island of Nevis. And it is for that reason, Mr. President, that we're asking our citizenry to rise to the occasion. There are too many of our people who simply refuse to pay their taxes. And as a consequence, the administration is put under tremendous pressure. And, Mr. President, our ability to deliver goods and services is put under tremendous pressure. So a lot of times we have people who say they want a job in the government. The government has to find money to pay those workers. People say they want improvements here and improvements there. They have to be paid. And so I'm asking our public, please, to be responsible citizens, responsible residents, and to pay the government the necessary taxes and levies so that we can set about doing the work that we have been elected to do. I want, Mr. President, as part of my presentation, which I promise to be brief, to commend the tax authorities here on Nevis. Mrs. Lemonta and her team at the Inland Revenue Department. I also want to commend the leadership of our Financial Secretary, our Permanent Secretary of Finance, Mr. Colin Doe, because the outturns, Mr. President, that we have seen thus far in the first 6 months are encouraging. They are encouraging because we have sought to engage with taxpayers. We have introduced some innovations, which I will get to. And we are looking now at an increase in our collections, which we hope will continue. I have had a little report furnished to me, which I propose to share with the House, Mr. President, with your permission. And that tells us that the actual revenue, this is not budgeted, this is the actual revenue collection for the first 6 months of this year, January 1st to June 30th, is $34,573,403.67. That, Mr. President, represents a significant growth of $3,504,530.95, or 11.2% when compared to the same 6-month period in 2017. In 2017, at this stage, Mr. President, for the first 6 months of the year, we had a collection of $31,068,872.72. And so it means, therefore, Mr. President, that we are moving in the right direction because we have not introduced any new taxes. And so the same taxes are yielding more because, Mr. President, our people are responding in a positive way. Just for the record and for the public, the actual revenue collections from January 1st to June 30th, 2017 compared to 2018. Actual revenue collections for the first 6 months of 2017, as I said, was $31,068,872.72. And thus far, for this year, 2018, $34,573,403.67, or $3,504,530.95 above where we were last year. When we look inside the numbers, Mr. President, to the top performing tax types, which have realized a surplus and put us in a better position, some 11.2% better than where we were last year at the same time. We see the business and occupation license. That tax has grown by 4.7% this year over the same period last year. We had collected last year just about $522,000 at this point. This year we would have collected $546,874. So a variance, 4.7%, we've collected about $24,500 more from the business and occupation license. Corporate income tax, in 2017 we collected $3.4 million. We have so far this year for the same period collected $3.6 million, a variance of 5.66%. Property tax, last year up to this point we had collected $1.9 million. And this is significant, Mr. President. We had collected last year up to this point $1.9 million from property tax. This year so far we have collected $2.7 million from property tax, an increase over our period of last year of some $724,452.04, or 36.53%. Unincorporated business tax, or UBT, last year up to this point we had $965,619. This year we have already collected $1,036,335.12, for an increase of 7.32%. And then VAT, value-added tax. Last year at this point we had collected $10,626,519.10. Thus far for this year, Mr. President, we have collected $11,707,832.29, for an overage, an increase in collections of $1,081,313.19, or 10.18%. I say that to say that in these 5 categories of tax, Mr. President, these are the top performers for us to date, and they have been given outturns which exceed the outturns that we had in the first 6 months of last year. Now you may ask, and the public may ask, and I'm sure the opposition may ask, how does this look in terms of the budgeted revenue? And so I just wanted to report that the actual revenue that we have achieved thus far for the first 6 months of 2018, be it $34,573,403.67, that we have surpassed our budgeted revenue of $32,729,905 $919.85. And so we have, for the first 6 months, registered a surplus of $1,843,483.82, or 5.6% over the budgeted revenue, Mr. President. So I believe that commendations are due to our Inland Revenue authorities, the tax collection departments, and commendations are due to our taxpayers, our residents, who are clearly demonstrating that they are being responsible citizens, and that for us is very important. Mr. President, just a snapshot so that again the public has a sense of where we are and hopefully where we are hoping to go. Actual collections for the period 2017 was $56.5 million. This was a slight decrease of $2.7 million, or 2.7% as compared to 2016. Of the total revenue collected in 2017, the core tax types comprising corporate income tax, value-added tax, and property tax combined contributed 49%. In 2016, revenue collections amassed $57.3 million, a decrease of $780,000 as compared to 2015, which saw a revenue collection of $58.9 million. So, Mr. President, I say all that to say that we have over the years 2015, 2016, 2017 seen a slight decline each year of our revenue coming in from taxes. And we are hopeful, Mr. President, that this year, 2018, we can turn that around. That for us is of critical importance. Now, Mr. President, I wanted to take a moment, because oftentimes when we say the word amnesty, our people have a negative reaction. They feel that somehow it may not be a good thing. Well, we announced that we were going to have an amnesty on property tax, not an amnesty on the payment of the tax itself. But we said if people came in between 1st June to 30th June 2018, that we would waive all penalties and interest over $100. And so if you owed $1,000 in tax, but you had not paid for many years, that tax bill might well have mounted up with penalties and interest to $4,000 or $5,000. We said, come on in during the month of June, pay your $1,000 plus $100, and we will waive the rest. Mr. President, I'm very, very happy to say that it has been a resounding success. Based on that property tax amnesty for the period June 1st to June 30th, the total revenue collected in that month of June is $1.8 million. That is an increase, Mr. President. I want the record to show. That is an increase of $764,000, or 71% when compared with 2017. It tells us, Mr. President, that the public has responded positively to the amnesty. Now, I have had a conversation with the head of Inland Revenue here, the Deputy Comptroller, Mrs. Limonta. I've also had a conversation with Mr. Gift, the Comptroller in St. Kitts. And, Mr. President, I wish to announce today that we will consider granting an additional month amnesty so that those who neglected, forgot, or couldn't come in during the month of June might be afforded an additional opportunity to come in and regularize their tax status. So the amnesty has worked, and our tax collection from this area of property tax, which is a notoriously difficult area, that has blossomed to 71% over where we were last year. And just to give some actual numbers, Mr. President, in 2015 in June, we collected $1,204,263.32. In 2006, in June, we collected $904,770.39. In 2017, in June, we collected $1,081,672.71. And because of the amnesty, this year, 2018, in June, we have collected $1,846,236.03. Mr. President, I feel that by any analysis, the amnesty has worked. And we are grateful to those who took advantage of it. We're grateful to the Inland Revenue Department because they went out with several public service announcements to encourage people to come in during the month of June and clear themselves up, settle up their tax bill, and avoid the penalties and avoid the interest. And they responded, Mr. President, as the numbers show. I am told by St. Kitts that they too have had similar success on St. Kitts. And so we feel that the public has responded in a very positive way, and for that we are truly grateful. As I said, Mr. President, we will consult further with the technical team, but the thinking is that perhaps a short extension of this amnesty period might bring additional people into the fold so that everybody can be a responsible citizen, a responsible taxpayer. Mr. President, again in this difficult era of property tax, the actual revenue collections for the first 6 months of 2018 is $2.7 million. That is 77% of the overall budgeted revenue for 2018 of $3.5 million. Put differently, Mr. President, when we passed the budget, we estimated, we budgeted that we would have $3.5 million coming into the government coffers from property tax. That number had not changed from the previous budget because, as I said, it is a stubborn tax. It's a difficult tax to collect. But what we are seeing through this amnesty is that as I stand here today, Mr. President, we have so far of the 3.5 million budgeted, collected 2.7 as of June. So we are 77% of the way to achieving our budget, and I'm hopeful that as the public response, particularly Nevisians living overseas and property owners living overseas, that they respond positively to paying their tax, paying their property tax, and bringing themselves into compliance with the law. What it tells me, therefore, is that we are more than 3/4 of the way to where we need to be in meeting our budget. And indeed, Mr. President, I would wish that we surpass the budget, we surpass the revenue anticipated if our public continues to respond in a responsible way. By way of comparison, for 2017, the actual revenue collections for the first 6 months from property tax was $1.9 million, or 57% of the overall budgeted revenue of $3.5 million. So again, it demonstrates that we're doing far better, some 20% better this year than we were doing last year in relation to where we are when compared, our actual receipts is compared to what we have budgeted. The budget revenue for 2017, Mr. President, was $3.5 million from property tax. And at this point, in the first 6 months of 2017, we had collected $1,983,032.63. The same budgeted amount, $3.5 million for 2018, but as of this point, we have collected $2,700,000, or as I said, 77% of our budgeted target. Mr. President, I have laid out that because I think that this is yet another example of this administration trying to be innovative, trying to do more with the little that we have. We understand, Mr. President, that the demands of modern government, the financial demands, are significant, and we are trying to respond. And this property tax amnesty was one of the innovations that the technocrats at Inland Revenue, both in St. Kitts and Nevis, came up with, and one that we embraced as a cabinet, and one that I feel, Mr. President, through these numbers that I've just shared, has been a resounding success. And so we want again to thank them and thank our public. We cannot do it without our public. And I end, Mr. President, in support of this amendment where I started, to say that we want our public to be responsible citizens, responsible taxpayers, and understand that nothing that the government does can be done if our people are not paying their taxes. And so whilst we have come today to amend the Tax Administration Procedures Act, Ordinance, to seek to give our Inland Revenue authorities more teeth, to allow them to publish the names of recalcitrant repeat offenders Because you hear what we say? It is 3 tax periods consecutively if you don't pay. You get your name put in the pages of the leading newspapers in the country so that everybody could know. Every tooth, mun, saman bagay, to use a phrase that my friend on the other side likes to use, would know that they're not paying their taxes. That's important, Mr. President. It's important because it is unfair to the mother in Jessups. It's unfair to the old man in Brownhill to have to go in and pay his taxes when so many around here owe millions of dollars and refuse to pay. And so we are saying now that it is high time that the public knows who they are. We hope we don't have to use it. But we're putting the mechanisms in place so that if it comes to that and the recalcitrance continues, that there is a mechanism available to the Inland Revenue authorities to name them. To name them. Shame them too? Name them and shame them. It has worked in St. Kitts, and my hope is that it would work over here as well, that those who refuse to be responsible citizens can be named. We also, of course, are proposing the amendment to allow a penalty of 10%. We are hopeful, Mr. President, even as we ask for the support of this House for these amendments, that we will never have to use them, and that people will be responsible and do the responsible thing. With those few words, Mr. President, I wish this bill safe passage for this honorable House. May it please you.
A bill to amend the Tax Administration and Procedures Ordinance, Chapter 6.11 N in bracket, and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a second time. House in committee.
Clause 3.
The question is that Clause 3 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
The question is that Clause 2 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 1.
Question is that Clause 1 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Enacting clause.
Question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Title.
The question is that the title do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Could I just make an interjection here, please? On page 2, Honorable Farrell-Smithen, there's a correction there. President and the spelling of the name, Farrell. It's actually one L. So you have to bear that in mind. Okay.
Mr. President, the bill shortly entitled Tax Administration Procedures Amendment Bill 2018 has passed through the committee stage with the only amendment being the correction of the title of the President and the correction to the spelling of the first name of the President, Honorable Farrell Smitten, Farrell with one L, and President instead of Speaker. Beyond that, there are no corrections, and so I would wish to report to the House that the proposed bill has passed the committee stage with no substantive amendments. Mr. President, I would therefore ask the fiat of the Deputy Governor General, because it's a money bill having been given, I would ask that we suspend the standing order, I believe it's Rule 58, and allow this bill... 57, I'm sorry, and allow this bill to be read a third time and passed.
The suspension of 57 so that the bill could be read third time and passed. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Tax Administration and Procedure Ordinance, Chapter 6.11, N bracket, and for matters related thereto are connected herewith.
The bill has been read third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise to seek your leave to have read a second time the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Freedom of Information Ordinance 2018.
Mr. President, I support the motion to have the bill shortly entitled Freedom of Information Ordinance read a second time.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled Freedom of Information be read a second time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. President, I rise again to open the debate on this bill, the Freedom of Information Bill 2018, and let me also make my brief presentation on the bill, Mr. President. And in doing so, I would like to just highlight some of the basic tenets of the bill, and of course to provide some information to the listening and the viewing public in terms of what this bill is intended to do. Of course, Mr. President, this is the age of information, and the Nevis Island administration is intending that persons in the public will be able to access information that they so require. And in making this brief presentation, Mr. President, what I will intend to do is to answer some of the questions that may be asked by members of the public about the bill. And so, what is the Freedom of Information Bill 2018, Mr. President? Now, the Freedom of Information Bill 2018 is intended to give members of the public a general right to access information that is held by public authorities. And of course, there would be some exemptions where this is concerned. Now, what are the objects of the ordinance, Mr. President? This bill is intended to increase transparency and accountability of our public authorities. And of course, it will try to eliminate secrecy. Of course, Mr. President, this administration is very high on accountability and transparency. And we've seen that for the past 6 months since the new administration took office. And so we would like all of the public authorities to be able to ensure that they can publish certain information, certain documents, and the members of the public will have access to that information once the information is properly requested. And so we want to ensure that transparency and accountability is increased. We would also like, well, the bill will be able to establish the Office of the Commissioner of Information. Of course, once we have this bill passed in this Honorable House, Mr. President, a Commissioner of Information will be appointed. We would also seek through this bill to standardize the placement of information concerning public authorities. And of course, we also want to be able to inform the members of the general public of the activities of public authorities and the way the authorities operate and the way decisions are made by these public authorities. Now, Mr. President, persons may ask, who can access information under this ordinance? Once you are a citizen of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis or a resident of the Federation, you can have access to information under this ordinance. It could be you, Mr. President. It could be the man on the street. Once you are a citizen of the Federation, you have the access to get that information once it is requested and once it is information that is not deemed exempt under this ordinance. Mr. President, what information can be disclosed under the ordinance? Any information that is held by the public authority and which is not exempt under the ordinance can be disclosed once requested. Mr. President, what falls under the Freedom of Information Act? The Freedom of Information Act, Mr. President, allows for the full or the partial disclosure of previously unreleased information and documents controlled by any public authority. Of course, as I would have indicated, Mr. President, this is something that is unprecedented because previously there were certain documents that were held by public authorities that the general public, members of the public, could not have access to. This ordinance is intended to change that. Mr. President, what does the Freedom of Information Act cover? Now, the Freedom of Information Ordinance, it provides public access to information held by the public authorities in two ways. Public authorities are obliged under this ordinance to publish certain information about their activities. And of course, members of the general public, you and I, all persons in the general public, are entitled to request the information from the public authority. Mr. President, how does one access information from the ordinance? It's a very simple process. All someone needs to do, if they're requesting information from a public authority, is to have the request in writing. The request in writing, Mr. President, must be concise enough so that at least the public authority that the information is being requested from can understand what information that individual is looking for and what form that information is being requested from. And of course, the other interesting thing is, Mr. President, that if someone is requesting information from a public authority, that individual does not have to give a reason why they are requesting the information. Mr. President, I would have spoken about exemptions, and there are certain sensitive information that will not be released to any member of the public. And the bill sets out the exemptions. And I will just briefly highlight a few of the exemptions. Documents affecting health and the safety of individuals. Of course, we would know that persons may want to get certain information about persons, maybe to try to blackmail. We will try our utmost, Mr. President, to ensure that this doesn't happen. So the bill sets out the exemptions. Documents affecting personal privacy and containing personal information. general information received in confidence, cabinet documents. Mr. President, cabinet documents are highly sensitive documents, and these are documents that we would not like out there in the public domain. Most of us would know that not even our secretaries have access to some of these cabinet documents. And so things like cabinet documents cannot be released. And so it would not be in order for any members of the general public to ask for cabinet documents. Things like international relations documents, documents affecting enforcement and administration of the law, documents affecting legal proceedings. Of course, we know that court proceedings, very confidential, and so court proceedings and so on will not be accessible to members of the general public. Now, Mr. President, how long does someone have to respond to a Freedom of Information request? If a Freedom of Information request is made, the person in the public authority should respond to that request, whether the request will be granted or the request will be denied, and that should be done in a reasonable time frame. However, the bill actually sets out a time frame in which that request should be granted, and that is 30 working days. 30 working days. And of course, we know here in St. Kitts and in Nevis, the working days does not include Saturdays and Sundays. So, just drawing a reference, Mr. President, if you make a request in writing for a particular document for a public authority, the person in charge of that public authority is mandated to tell you whether your request is denied or granted within a 30-day period. However, Mr. President, the document not necessarily has to be provided within the 30 working day period. But you, as the person who is in charge of the public authority, you must inform the person requesting within 30 days whether or not that request will be granted. And of course, Mr. President, people would always ask about the cost. It will cost members of the general public nothing to make a request. You make your request in writing, costs you nothing. However, of course, if you're asking for printed documents, that would entail cost. And of course, the cost will be determined by the public authority, and you will be informed as to what will be the cost for the document or for the information that you are requesting. And once that cost is paid, Mr. President, you will have your information. Mr. President, there are some important features of the ordinance. And one of the features of the ordinance is that all of the public authorities, including the departments, will have an information officer. And that information officer, whoever that information officer is, who is appointed to that particular authority or department, must, within a particular time frame of the passage of this bill in this Honorable House, must provide some information. They must, under Section 78, within 3 months of the commencement of this ordinance, complete a guide containing practical information to facilitate release of information. And of course, Mr. President, a public authority shall take reasonable steps to enable an applicant to be notified of the approval or refusal of the request. And of course, I would have spoken about that a while ago. Mr. President, if your request is denied, it is in the interest of the public authority as well to give you the reasons why your request is denied as well. And of course, Mr. President, where the decision is to grant the request, then the public authority concerned shall decide the form or the manner in which the information will be provided. Mr. President, let me just just briefly inform what is the process. I would have spoken about the tenets of the bill, and I will now speak about the general process in terms of requesting and receiving information. It's a very simple process, Mr. President. And the first step in the process is that the applicant submits a written application. And let me stress, written application. So the bill is not intended for persons to make a call on the telephone and say, well, I need this, and I'm coming in tomorrow to get this document. So you must submit your request in writing. You cannot meet someone on the street, someone from the public authority, and said, I need a document about a road that is being built there. I need the cost of the road. I need a document about the hospital rehabilitation. You have to submit the request in writing to the public authority. And of course, once that request is submitted in writing, the authority will grant or deny the access within 30 days. After that, Mr. President, if the application is granted and applicable fees are paid, then the actual access is given. If the access is refused or delayed by the public authority, the applicant may seek redress, what is called an internal review. And if the review is of a decision by the head of the public authority, then the matter will be referred to the commissioner. Of course, previously I spoke about the establishment of the office of who we call the Commissioner of Information. And of course, the applicant may also refer to the commissioner himself or herself. Mr. President, this administration is all about transparency and accountability. And of course, it's unprecedented what we have seen over the past months, Mr. President, where we have seen information being provided to the members of the public on a very regular basis. We have seen the implementation of the monthly press conference by the Premier. That is unprecedented. And of course, now this Freedom of Information bill that we have brought to this Honorable House. What that is saying, Mr. President, is that this administration is ensuring that the people who would have placed their confidence in members of this administration, we are ensuring that we put information in the public domain so that at least, Mr. President, there are a lot of times when unfounded charges are laid at public departments, public authorities, against ministers, and this will ensure that that comes to us, that ceases, because persons will be able to have access to information. If persons have a problem with a certain project that is taking place, if persons may have misconceptions of the cost of certain projects that are taking place, this bill, Mr. President, is intended to cease that. Persons will have free access to information. This administration, Mr. President, has nothing to hide. Everything is being done above board, and that is why we have brought this bill to this Honorable House. I would therefore like, Mr. President, with your leave, to wish this bill safe passage to this Honorable House. Thank you.
Is it on? It's on? No. Okay. Mr. President, I rise to make a contribution to this bill, the Nevis Freedom of Information Bill 2018, which would soon become an ordinance in this honorable House. Firstly, let me state that in combination with the Integrity Act in public life, of course, you have very powerful instruments for the public of this country to know what's happening in government, in all aspects of government. I'm not clear in my mind, Mr. President, why the PAC was gutted. I thought that instrument, along with these two bills, would be the perfect symphony to direct good governance in this island that we call Nevis. The PAC allows for members of government and the opposition to sit together in subcommittee to discuss the activities of government in whatever form and public corporations, to examine, like they do in the United States of America, using the Senate and the House of Representatives, allowing for public exposure so that the public will easily understand through their representatives what is happening in their country. That, along with these two bills, would make it easier for the public to know and to utilize the Integrity in Public Life Bill. Whether ministers or senior civil servants or people in the public service corporations are conducting themselves in a manner that is expected by the public and is required from public service. However, Mr. President, as I look through this bill, it seems to me that similar inquiries are permitted. The only difference is that there is no standing committee or subcommittee, but it is a requirement on the part of members of the public. Those members, of course, can be coming from the opposition. They can be coming from civil society. They could be coming from the chambers of commerce, or just generally an individual who is a member of our society. For me, that does not remove the need for a PAC that has teeth, that the opposition and government can use to debate further and to create the transparency that the minister spoke about earlier. If we require transparency, and if we are serious about transparency, we would not gut any of these bills, but we will find ways and means of tightening and ensuring that good governance prevails in the government of this country. I wish to make that comment in the first instance, Mr. President, because over and over again, the minister spoke of transparency and the desire of the government and the will of the government and the action of the government. So I'm simply making that point. And I do believe, sir, all of the point might be made that the gutting of the bill did not take place on the island of Nevis. It took place at a federal level and would affect any kind of PAC that we establish in this country if we do establish one. I do hope, however, and I maybe I'm expecting too much, that we could deviate from what was done in St. Kitts and maintain the basic principles of the PAC as we know it in Nevis, and that one would be implemented as well. And that will strengthen these two bills, one which has been passed, and to my understanding is already being implemented, and this one that we are passing in the House today. By the way, I was asked by the person appointed by the opposition what was the status of the commission in regard to the integrity in public life, because he has received no notice. But yet he understands from public discussion and from news in the public domain that the committee has been constituted and is active. So I will ask the Honorable Premier to take note of that. And I know it is within the boundaries of the Deputy Governor General to do that. But since the announcement came from the government and not from the Deputy Governor General, that maybe that situation can be speedily clarified. Mr. President, let me say at the very beginning that I'm not here to oppose this bill. I will support it. I will support it because I do believe that these bills together can help in the maintenance of good governance. So I will support it. But works on paper can always be undermined by the works in action of a government or persons in government. How many times have we seen certain things passed and then nothing happens? The matter of the bill dealing with integrity in public life in the federal parliament has been there for a long time and has never been activated. And many persons did, my government, this government, all the governments, to activate such a bill. The Premier has had the courage to do it, and I congratulate him. Let us now see how it will play out in terms of action. Because I want to say, as I said earlier, that it demands not just talk of integrity and good behavior in government, it demands it. It requires it. And the onus is not only on the persons who are sitting inside here, Mr. President, but the onus is on senior civil servants, heads of corporations, and all those who have access of one kind or the other in terms of government authority and the use of government money. And so those of us who need to clean up, Mr. President, I believe we better begin to clean up now, because serious times are ahead. And as I said, I'm going to support it because I'm glad that in terms of good government in Nevis, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in the Caribbean, the time has come for it to happen. You see, Mr. President, we speak of democracy. We speak of democracy. And you wonder sometimes if that word has any meaning any longer. Because it seems to me that even in the first world, efforts are always made to subvert and to get around democracy and the trappings and the and the laws and regulations of democracy. And we have an example to the north, Mr. President, which does not help us. Does not help us at all. If we follow the reportings of CNN and MSNBC and all the other media in the United States, we wonder seriously where we are going. Because we take example, maybe as we ought to a point, from the nations who are supposed to be leaders of democracy. Albeit that our democracy stems from the British system of government and not the American system of government. And the checks and balances that, and the penalties that are available in Britain seem not to be available in the United States of America for the leading members of government in the United States of America. It is almost like we have gone back to the old days of divine privilege. The privilege of the emperor, the divine rights of kings. That is how we seem to be moving back towards a form of dictatorship. And I don't think it is a good example for us here in the Caribbean, especially as I've said that our democracy comes down from generations and generations and years of experience, practical experience that the British have gone through, including civil wars. So having said all that, I will ask the first question, Mr. President. The Commissioner of Information. Now, this is a very serious position, as outlined in this document, and as outlined by the Minister. The Commissioner of Information, it is my understanding, is responsible for training, advising, and working with government leaders, civil servants, and heads of corporations how to go about implementing this act of freedom of information. In other words, we have passed an act. Doesn't end here. The people and the government must understand what their responsibilities are, what they're supposed to do, and how they're to deal with the public, and they must make information available that is requested. And even if the request is not properly done, that the people be advised how to do it properly. That is absolutely important. So who will be the commissioner? Nobody is going to answer that question this morning. And I don't want it to appear that I'm asking the question, Mr. Premier. I'm stating out openly who will be the commissioner. I am not interested in knowing the name of the person. I'm more interested in the character of the person, the experience of the person, the record of the person, the integrity of the person. That is why I raise the question. Because it is important not to know the name of the person, but to understand the kind of person that has to have a position like this. This must be a person of exalted position, self-respect and self-esteem. Somebody who protects and treasures his character. That is the kind of person that has to be appointed here. I know that inside here in the document, it is stated that the person will be recommended by the Premier after consultation with the leader of the opposition. I also know that in terms of losing his position, that it cannot happen without the approval of the opposition. I've seen those. I've seen those there and there. But you see, it's better to do something right than to have to fix it. And so I'm therefore saying that we must understand the kind of person that has to be appointed. And we do not have a history of being totally impartial or being high-minded in the appointment of people. We do not have that history. And so I'm saying, let us make sure that we get it right. Because if we don't, it can lead to embarrassment, it can lead to unnecessary confusion, which I do hope that all of us would wish to avoid. Mr. President, it outlines that you can have access to information. And I understand, and I must say this, that there must be exceptions to the rule. If you have cabinet papers, I don't expect that the people of the country will have access to the cabinet papers. I don't expect that readily people of the country will have access to the cabinet decisions or to bills that are going to be placed in Parliament. I understand all that. Those things, you don't want any confusion surrounding them, and you don't want any undermining or any misinformation being given to the public or any propaganda that can undermine the good intentions of government or the good intentions of cabinet. So I am not going to quarrel about that. But I want to raise this question. Suppose, just suppose, that resistance is met in terms of information that should be made available to the public. Suppose that is done, Mr. President. And the matter has to be taken to court. Who pays? I'm not talking about trifling cases, because there can be trifling cases and trifling instances. But the question is, who pays? I don't see anything in this bill that says who pays. I have noticed more and more that the courts are more for those who have money than for those who don't have. Because the kinds of sums of money that could be paid as costs is a deterrent in itself to people going to the court. And while a very rich person can go through the procedures, the local court, appeals court, privy council, many of us won't do it because it is expensive. So it seems to me that some kind of consideration should be given to this matter. Who pays when serious matters are challenged in the court? Who pays? The ministers of government, the heads of department, they're covered by the government. But a private citizen has no coverage. And that private citizen, therefore, has to think in terms of his pocket, his money. If we want to make sure that this bill is effective, in a country like Nevis, where we don't have many millionaires, I don't know how many we have, but must be only a few, let us try to accommodate the transparency by giving coverage to both sides. However it is phrased, however it is done, otherwise the bill can become ineffective. It is on record, it is there, but a Mrs. Bass may challenge, but a Joseph Parry may not challenge. I'm quite sure we understand what I'm saying, very seriously. And that happens all over the world, where the people with money can afford to challenge because they know how much they can afford to lose. But in the case of the poorer people of the society, they can just grumble and go about their business. Mr. President, let us look at the objects of the ordinance. And I don't want to preempt the minister or necessarily repeat what he said. But I still think it is my obligation in speaking to the public to let the public know how I view this bill from the point of view of the opposition. The bill does not cover radio stations, television stations, etc., etc. It covers the actions of the civil service. I am no expert in what it should cover. I just wonder why is it just limited to this in terms of information. It says, give the public the right to obtain access to information held by public authorities. I listened to the minister, and at one point the minister said, information that is published to be made available. At another point, listening to him, it seems to me he was talking about information that was published or not published. So we need a little clarification there. Because I would like to think that whether the information is published or not, that the public should have access to it once the information is available. That is how I see it. So I would like that clarification, whether it is published or whether it is published or not published, because I really feel that should happen. Increase transparency and accountability of public authorities and eliminate unnecessary secrecy with regard to information held by public authorities. That will take not only education of the public service, but education of the public. The public in Nevis. We are a young democracy. We have supporters who sometimes behave in a tribal manner, who feel that they have to take their swords out or their weapons out and protect their government, and nobody should know what's going on anywhere. We need to break down those barriers and those narrow-minded thinking and let people understand that the public business is business for the public, and there's no great secrecy. I have always said that. I say, why are you all so worried about knowing what's going on in government or people not knowing? It is public business. There's nothing to hide. You have something to hide when you're corrupt. You have something to hide when you're a thief. You have something to hide when you're doing wrong things. But if you're not doing those things, there's nothing to hide. Absolutely nothing. And those who are inclined to or have a temptation to do what is not right, this is good for them. Along with the other bill in terms of integrity in public life. This is good for them, to keep them on the right track. But it must be serious, Mr. President. So we speak that it will increase transparency. In other words, you have a right. The public of Nevis have a right to know. They have a right to know. And there is nothing secret, nothing that has to be hidden from you, the public. Because as the Minister of Finance said, you are paying your taxes. This morning he said Inland Revenue collected $3 million more in the first 6 months than they did last year. And he said when this amnesty was given, people ran in and paid. And I think the increase was 71%. So you're paying your taxes. So you need to have something in return. You have a right to know. And nobody should attack anybody if a question is raised or if somebody asks a question or seek information. Nobody has that right. Nobody has that right. The information is there. The information is available. We are talking about transparency in this honorable house, and the people must be allowed to ask whatever questions they ask. They want to ask within the boundaries of the law. Mr. President, is it turned on? Is that on? The battery? Okay. Mr. President, I want the public to understand. I want the public to understand.
Wait. Could we make a change with the mic, please?
I want the public to understand. We're not just talking about the civil service and the regular heads of government. We're talking about NASPA. We are talking about the Housing Corporation. We are talking about Nevis, because Nevis is 100% owned by government. A lot of people don't seem to know that. We are talking about all these various institutions of government. We are talking about the work that is being done at the hospital. We are talking about the work that is being done over at Awali. We are talking about the building that's taking place in Charlestown. We are asking questions like, was there proper contracts done? Is there somebody doing bills of quantities? I hear the minister speaking of bills of quantities. I know a young lady, I don't know where she is right now, but a young Nevisian lady who went to university and is a quantity surveyor. I don't think you have to look far for her. Her first surname is Chapman. I don't know where she is, but she right here, and she's not working. Oh, she's working now. Oh well. All right, that's good. That's news. You try to get her? Okay, all right. Come on, you can get her. You can share her. Yeah, it's government. Yeah, come on. Don't say you can't get her. She's not a piece of paper. It's somebody who could benefit a government and help you to save money. You are absolutely right. And if you have one, share the one until you can get two. So I mean, is all these trucks that are running up and down the place, Mr. President? Some trucks carrying empty air backward and forward. That got to stop now. I hope the truckers know that, and they better go and sell their trucks. And all the different things that have gone wrong, Mr. President. For example, and I will confess that I did not support that the pier at Awali be placed in the position it's being placed. I know we need a pier, and I know the usefulness, but I'm not in government. So you put it down, fine. You have the majority, you put it down. But I'm sure the public would like to know why the piles are only 2 feet in the ground. Is there a problem? Is there a problem in driving those piles down? Is there something wrong? The work has stopped for 2 weeks. What's going on? Things like those people need to know. When the pier is done, is access available for everybody? All the boats? Those are questions. And other questions are being asked. To tell the truth, Mr. President, I haven't been asking too many questions, but people are asking, and they need answers. And maybe, even though this act is passed, this bill becomes an ordinance, you may find that some people don't want to go to the trouble to ask. Some people might be even afraid to ask because they're afraid of themselves. You know how it is in Nevis. You take a man and you put him in government, and every time he passes by, people begin to tremble. You take him out of government and they stop tremble. I don't understand it, but that is the nature of Nevis at this particular time. We fear. We love to be afraid because we are afraid to move forward as a people. And we love to hear about mental slavery and so on. What mental slavery? It's ourselves. It's ourselves and our agendas that we have. Our agendas that we have, why we behave like this. But I'm saying that whether the people do or they don't, questions should be advanced. And members of the opposition will ask questions, and because I've been told to make the inquiries, I am making them. The next point here, inform the public about the activities of public authorities, including the manner in which decisions are made by them that will affect members of the public. Well, that in itself, I thought was always self-evident, that the public authorities should let the public know. And I would like to say this. When you publish information, public information on all the persons, don't public and half. Don't tell people that Joseph Parry is not paying his electricity bills, but Mark Brantley is not paying his and his name is not called. Let both of us be exposed for not paying our electricity bills. All these things need to stop. And I hope this is what we are trying to do here, to make sure that when we speak of transparency, we are talking about transparency because government information has been used and misused in the past, and we need to put an end to that. We need to put an end to that. Standardize the replacement of information concerning public authorities in the public domain as a matter of routine, and establish the officer of the Commissioner of Information and specify functions of the office. These are the objects, and the key person here is the Commissioner. I'm not going to go through that again because I think I've said enough about that. I don't want to know the name. I'm more interested in the character of the person, his standing in society, and his ability to carry out his duties effectively. Somebody said to me last night, but the Commissioner is going to be a creature of the government. Well, I don't know how you're going to stop that, because even the High Court judges in England are appointed by the government. The government has to appoint somebody somewhere. The OECS court, they're paid by government. Somebody has to pay. But if you put certain checks and balances and you get a creature of high standing, then you will begin to achieve something. I see here on page, what is the page? It don't seem to be numbered. But anyway, part 2, administration, number 6. I think there's something wrong with the numbering, but anyway. All right, let me read. The Commissioner of Information shall be appointed by the Governor General after consultation with the Premier, who shall first have consulted the Leader of the Opposition. Okay. I mentioned it before. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, what does this consultation mean? You can consult, but you don't have to take the advice. So basically, it's saying nothing. What it's really saying, the Governor General would be advised by the Premier and would appoint the person. And in these parts, normally the Governor General only rubber stamp people. They only rubber stamp people. Mr. Mark Brantley will decide after he has discussions with the Cabinet who the person is, and the person will be appointed. We understand that. I'm not going to argue with that because that is what is going to happen. So I repeat, let us put somebody of standing, not some riffraff or somebody you can push backward and forward. It says the 6th, the Commissioner shall not hold any office of profit. And let's note that, the Commissioner shall not hold any office of profit other than that of Commissioner, or otherwise engage in any occupation for reward outside the duties of Commissioner or information, unless authorized in writing by the Governor General on the recommendation of the Premier. So the person will have to be paid. And when I say that, I mean the person has to be properly paid. You can't offer the person $3,000 and expect the person not to do another job on the side, not on the side, another job to make a profit. That person of that kind of quality and caliber can't live off $3,000 a month. So all these things have to be taken in consideration. And the next clause says, the Commissioner may be removed from office by the Governor General for inability to exercise the functions of office as a result of infirmity of body or mind or any other cause or misbehavior on the recommendation of the Premier with the approval of the Leader of the Opposition. This clause is a good one. It has more strength than the other one. Because what the other one says, the Premier can appoint him as a typo. I hope you're joking. I hope you're joking. Mr. President, with those few words, the last point I'm going to make. A person fails or refuses to comply with a requirement under this section who hinders or obstructs the Commissioner in the performance of his functions under the section is guilty of an offense and is liable to a summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $5,000 or a term not exceeding 6 months or both. That is impeding the Commissioner is doing his job. But I go back to the point, what about the public? When the public tries to request information and it is not provided. I repeat that it is important that the public too be protected so that we can have real and true transparency. With those few words, Mr. President, I support this bill as it is passed into law in this honorable House.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my support to this legislation and to focus my attention, Mr. President, on just two areas of this particular legislation. Section 23, well, three sections, Section 23, 26, and 27, Mr. President. Mr. President, it appears to me that the mover of this legislation had sight of my notes, but it is important, Mr. President, that I highlight these few areas that I believe is in the interests of the public. With your permission, Mr. President, I wish to read exactly what is written in Section 23(1) of this legislation. Subject to this ordinance, every person who is a citizen of St. Christopher and Nevis or a resident of St. Christopher and Nevis has a right to and shall, on request, be given access to any document that is held by a public authority other than an exempt record. Mr. President, I thought I would highlight this section because the essence of this document, Mr. President, is to allow the general public to have access to information. And like the member for Nevis number 5 would have indicated, that this is a serious piece of legislation, Mr. President. It is serious because we believe that any government that is serious about doing what it's supposed to do in a manner that is transparent and open, the general public must have access to information. And this section, Mr. President, is saying to all and sundry that that is the case. Mr. President, Part 3 of Section 23 reads thus: an applicant is not required to give any reason for making a request for access to information held by a public authority. This, to Mr. President, is very important because we want to ensure that the general public must understand that they don't have to give an explanation or a reason as to why they need to access certain information. It is saying, Mr. President, to the general public that once you make your request on the form that is prescribed, you don't have to give any reason why. You can request that information, Mr. President. Mr. President, Section 26, subsection 2 of this legislation reads thus: a request must identify the document or contain sufficient information to enable the designated officer of the public authority or an employee of the public authority who is familiar with the relevant document to identify the record by taking reasonable steps to do so. Now, Mr. President, while we wish for the general public to have access to information, they must say exactly what it is that they are looking for. They can't come and say that they want to know about the contract for a particular project without specifying, Mr. President, which particular project that they are speaking of. So they must be precise, Mr. President. And I hope that the general public, in their quest to seek the information, must do so by identifying, Mr. President, what it is that they are asking for. Mr. President, Section 5 of Section 5, Mr. President, of subsection 5 of Section 26 reads thus, Mr. President. A public authority shall acknowledge receipt of a request within 5 working days after receipt of the request. Now, Mr. President, this is important because sometimes persons make requests of government or government offices for certain bits of information, and we know at times things take a much longer time than it ought to. This legislation, Mr. President, is saying that the public authority shall access receipt of a request within 5 days. Not 5 months, not 5 years, Mr. President, but within 5 days. It shows, Mr. President, that while you are requesting information, there must be a response within a very short period of time. Mr. President, Section 27, subsection 2. You have subsection 3, but I believe it's a typo. It should be subsection 2, Mr. President. And I want to read that section, Mr. President, because I believe that this is also very important. Where a request in writing is made to a public authority for access to an official document, the public authority shall not refuse the request on the grounds that the request does not comply with Section 26, without first giving the applicant a reasonable opportunity of consultation with the public authority with a view to amend the request so that it complies with the form requested by Section 26. Mr. President, this is also very important because while there would be a prescribed form for the request for information, we believe that there may be some errors on the application. And this is saying, Mr. President, that a request will just not be denied because there is a mistake or there is an error. It will be the responsibility of the public authority to assist that person who is making that request to make sure that they get things in order to grant their request. This is also going to the root of this legislation, Mr. President, of giving access to information regardless of whether there might be an error. And this is important, Mr. President, and I want the general public to understand that while we know and while we believe that there may be errors in their application, it will be the responsibility of the authorities to make sure that they have all of their information in proper order so that they can have access to the information that they are requesting. Mr. President, I thought I would highlight those few areas, and it is my hope that this bill will have a safe passage to this Honourable House. May it please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my voice in support of this particular piece of legislation that has come, in my view, not a moment too soon to this Nevis Island Assembly for passage. I believe there's no opposition, Mr. President, to the bill at question, and in fact, even the member of the opposition here was very clear that he supported the bill, although, of course, the honourable member had some concerns that we have noted. He raised a concern, for example, about the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee, indicating I believe the language that I noted was that he suggested that it had somehow been gutted. I want to just correct the record in that regard, because we have really not done in the island of Nevis anything in this legislature or otherwise to gut or in any way minimize or diminish the Public Accounts Committee. We have not done anything in this House, of course. The Public Accounts Committee, as I understand it, to the extent that it is a Public Accounts Committee for the Nevis Island Administration, the Nevis Island Assembly, that Public Accounts Committee ought to stand. The difficulty, Mr. President, that we face, and I think that my honourable friend and member on the other side would note that because he once sat in this very chair as Premier, I believe for some 6.5 years, and prior to that would have sat in government. And the reality is that successive governments, Mr. President, have not done very much in relation to the Public Accounts Committee, which is provided for under the Constitution and has, as the Honourable Gentleman has pointed out, some value. What I would want to say and be very clear about is that we campaigned last year in an election. We said during that campaign that if the people of Nevis were minded to give us a mandate, that we would do certain things. We said we would operationalize integrity in public life legislation, which had been passed since 2013, but which had remained dormant. We said we would pass freedom of information legislation, and we not only said so, we committed to doing both within a 6-month time frame from being elected. I take on board the comments raised by the honourable member opposite in relation to the Public Accounts Committee, and I entirely endorse the view that that is another strand in the whole process of good governance. But I would be quick to point out that it is not a strand that has hitherto worked or been given the opportunity to work in the Nevis context, and certainly since we have had a Nevis Island administration since 1983. That is not by way of excuse, Mr. President, I want to make it clear, that is simply stating a fact. Because I myself have been around this Parliament for the last decade or more, and we have never had a functioning Public Accounts Committee in this Parliament during the time that I've been there. So what I will commit to the public and to the honourable member opposite, that is a matter that we will take under advisement. It's a matter we will consult with the legal department to determine how and what we can do. Because we are on a path now of greater transparency. We are on a path of saying we will not only give lip service to good governance, we will put the necessary architecture in place, the necessary framework to ensure that we are not just talking the talk, but we are walking the walk. And that is why I believe that today is a day of particular relevance to our parliamentary history and to the life and times of our politics and our democracy, because we have come today to put in place another piece, another strand, using the language that I employed before, in this effort at greater transparency, in this effort at good governance. And we have to ground it in sound legislation. That is the objective, and that is why we're here. And I see this today, Mr. President, as being a significant step forward, a giant step forward, in not only doing what we said we would do, but creating the necessary architecture for the island of Nevis and the people who live in Nevis to have the kind of government which we feel they deserve and we feel that the modern times demand. Now, some may have asked, why is it the Nevis Island administration is seeking to pass this legislation? because, of course, the federal government has recently passed similar legislation. In fact, we would have introduced this legislation for first reading and then stayed our hand to allow the federal process to proceed. So many would have asked, well, why are you bothering with that in Nevis since you have it in St. Kitts? And what we have said is that because of the constitutional construct, Mr. President, that there is a Nevis Island administration with constitutional authority and a Nevis Island Assembly with constitutional authority. Because there are functionaries, public officers, that work for the Nevis Island administration but who have no jurisdiction federally, and where the federal government has no jurisdiction over them, that it is important that we pass this legislation here so that the people of Nevis are certain that they can access information. I'm not hearing. I don't know about other guys. So, Mr. President, the objective here is really for us to put in place the building blocks. And when we leave here today, hopefully, if the other members are minded to support, that we could have a moment in our parliament of which all of us can be proud. Because this legislation is not meant for CCM. It's not meant for Mark Brantley. It's not meant for NRP or for the honourable member opposite. It is designed for the people of Nevis to ensure that whoever sits in the future in this hallowed space, that those persons will be accountable to the members of the public. And I'm happy some of the young parliamentarians are here because they may well, based on what I'm seeing from the Cayman Islands, they may be sitting here very soon. So they should understand that we're passing legislation today which will require of them that they conduct themselves in a manner. And we are passing legislation today which will give to the public the necessary check and balance, the necessary ability, the tools to ensure that they have a government which is responsive. And so, Mr. President, I'm very pleased. I could not sit and allow the bill to pass without rising to record my own support. Because we have fought long and hard to get to this point in Nevis. We have campaigned about it, we've talked about it. A lot of words have been said, a lot of ink has been spilled. And the question now for us as an island is, where are we going? And is the government prepared to back its chat, as we would say colloquially, to walk the walk, to match the talk that it has had? And I think today, all of us can be agreed, friend or foe of this government, that we're doing what we say, what we said we would do. And we are honoring the commitments that we have made to the people of Nevis. Now, I think that the member opposite made a point when he spoke to the cost. We all understand that legal costs can be significant. We understand, Mr. President, that if someone were to seek information and that someone were to be denied, that they may wish to seek relief in the court, and that comes at a cost. I can say to the honourable member opposite that this is not a matter that had occupied our time. He has raised a new and interesting point. But it is something that we are prepared to look at. We also do not want to create a situation where you have busybodies. Because we have had in the past situations where we have some famous characters in St. Kitts and Nevis who have lived in the courthouse. Every chance they get, Mr. President, they sue somebody. So we also want to avoid a situation where people feel that they can do that at the expense of the government. I did note the honourable gentleman said serious matters, but there's always a question of, not trifling, but there's always a question of who determines the seriousness. To somebody out there in the public, they may think that their request is a very serious matter to them. So that is always the danger and the balance that we must strike. that we do not want to impede people's access either to the information or to the courts for redress if they feel that they have been disadvantaged in some way. But at the same time, we don't want to open the floodgates where the government may be faced with legal bills wrapped up by people who are litigious in nature and who decide that they would come because there are no consequences for coming because they have the government paying the bill for them. So that, I think, is a matter that we will look at. I am not at all opposed, Mr. President, that when good ideas come, we take them on board. As I said, this is not for me about the political divide that sometimes exists in the country. This is about creating the necessary type of government and governance that I believe we all aspire to and that we all want. We have had some time spent by the honourable member opposite looking at the question of who will be the commissioner. I think that must have been rhetorical because even he understands that we don't yet know who. Maybe he has a good person of high character that he can recommend. So, the truth is, Mr. President, that there is naturally a concern. We share the view that this person is going to be somebody of significance. Significance in the sense that this is a new regime that is being created. We've never had it before. And the legislation anticipates by its content that this person has to be on the highest probity. Whatever language you want to use, probity, character, good standing, bona fides, this person has to satisfy the highest standards. It is making it quite clear that this should be the person's primary focus as the Commissioner of Information. And so, our view is that this will take some time. We will have to search. We will be advised, no doubt. We will consult. And at the end of the day, the member opposite can be assured that no one will be appointed unless he is consulted. And he ought to know that when we say consult, we are serious about consultation. And so, the expectation would be that at the end of the day, we have a Commission of Information that both sides of the political divide, but most importantly, Mr. President, the public, most importantly, the public can have confidence in. And I agree that we'll have to find the money to pay the person, because the person has to be rewarded and compensated at a certain level. So I want the members of the public again to reflect on that for a moment. Here's a government saying that we are committed to the ideas of good governance and transparency, to the point where we are coming into a parliament to pass legislation that will affect us as well as anybody else. And we are prepared to create the position of Commissioner of Information to be properly compensated and an office properly created for this important institution, which will, we hope, become one of the pillars of modern democracy in Nevis. So I feel, Mr. President, that the government ought to be commended for this effort. And I want to thank the members on this side and thank the member opposite, because all of us recognize that there is a need for us to proceed and to proceed in a particular way. In a real way, we are catching up to the rest of the region. We have lagged behind. This is not new. It is not innovative. It is us now saying that this is what we ought to do. It is the right thing to do. And so we're moving in that direction. Now, the honourable member opposite also spoke of Section 6, subsection 7. Section 6, subsection 2 says that the Commissioner of Information shall be appointed by the Governor-General after consultation with the Premier, who shall first have consulted the opposition leader. That, we feel, is as it should be. Subsection 7, however, says that the Commissioner may be removed from office by the Governor-General for inability to exercise the functions of his office as a result of infirmity of body or mind or any other cause, or for misbehavior, on the recommendation of the Premier and with the approval of the Leader of the Opposition. So, the Honourable Member Opposite is correct that subsection 7, as drafted, goes farther than subsection 2. And I believe he will agree with me that it was a typo. He will agree with me. Because, in truth, Mr. President, we cannot create a situation where we can appoint a Commission of Information on the advice of the Premier after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. But to remove that person, we must have the approval of the Leader of the Opposition. Because whilst the Honourable Gentleman Opposite is the most reasonable member, it may not always be so. It may not always be so. It may not always be so. So, the reality is that if the approval of the Leader of the Opposition is required, then we may find ourselves in a situation where we can neither appoint nor disappoint. And that would be a matter of concern, because it would mean that this very important office and very important individual gets caught in the political divide that can sometimes arise. So, we believe that during the committee stage, Mr. President, we ought to be able to bring the two subsections into parity with each other and ensure that the position on the appointment is the same as the position on the removal. And so, Mr. President, I have not sought to bother myself or this House with the numerous studies from the United Nations and elsewhere about the cost of corruption in the world. I think we are inundated with these studies. We understand. Corruption is something that we have to tackle together. We have to fight together. In some places, it's a culture. A lot of things that we see in St. Kitts and Nevis or elsewhere, and they say that's a corrupt thing. In other places, it's how they do business. And so we have to guard ourselves and guard the island and guard the government and guard the opposition too. Guard public servants. We have to guard each other jealously to prevent, Mr. President, any of these untoward suggestions about us as a government, about the island that we love, and about the island that we serve. And so this Freedom of Information Bill is another string to our bow, as we say that there's no room for corruption in St. Kitts and Nevis, and in Nevis more specifically, in relation to what we're doing here today. That those who are out there looking at government and feel that government is a place to come to get rich, that we're putting the infrastructure in place to give them pause. And to say to them, this is not a place to come to get rich, this is a place to come to serve. And they must understand that. So we know that sometimes they're out there, Mr. President, when you hear them talk, they're like hungry beasts sometimes, like locusts, waiting to devour the government treasury. Like wolves. Some of them in sheep clothing. Trying to devour. And we are saying to them that that is not what public life is about. And the infrastructure that we are building out today is seeking to prevent that. So all who are out there should be warned that when you do get a chance to come in here, that there will be rules, there will be procedures, there will be something in place to ensure that we have the kind of governance that we need and that we rightly deserve. And that, for me, is of critical importance, that what we're doing today sends the right signals, gives the right information. The Honourable Member raised the issue about radio stations and the like, as to why the bill does not extend to them. I didn't quite understand, because I want to make it clear that a radio station or any other media house can utilize the bill to get information from government or from a government institution. But clearly we could not legislate that Freedom FM or Von Radio or any of the other radio stations is somehow mandated to give information to the public, because that would be a matter, well, the government-owned media, of course, because that is a department of government. So that request would come in the normal course through the regular channels to go to the Department of Information, as the case may be. So if that is the point, then absolutely I think the bill captures that, because the NTV is a part of the government, and certainly the bill is designed to allow access to government information and from government departments and ministries. To the extent that we could demand information from other private entities, then clearly that would not be within the authority of the Nevis Island Administration nor of the Nevis Island Assembly. But hopefully, Mr. President, that through our conduct, and I agree with the member opposite on this, that it is not only the passage of the legislation, but how we work it, how we manage it, that will really speak to whether we're serious or not in terms of this good governance agenda on which we have embarked. And so, Mr. President, I wanted to lend my voice, brief as it has been, in support of this bill, and to say that today is an important day, an historic day in the history of this Parliament. But if tomorrow is when America celebrates their independence, maybe today is our Independence Day. It's an important day, and as the
Yes.
The Commissioner may be removed from office by the Governor General for inability to exercise the function of his office as a result of infirmity of body or mind or any other cause of misbehavior. The recommendation of the Premier, we want to say after consultation with the leader of the opposition.